Hello YouTube, this is Thomas Judge coming back once again with another installment of my ongoing documentation for my retro gaming journey. Today we're going to be looking at how I set up and made my own Android TV plug and play device. Before we get into it, just to point out, the series is not going to be very much of a technical series, although this video is going to have a fair bit of technical information in there. This series is more a guide of how I learned how to learn about emulation. It's going to have links to all the various things that you need to know if you want to get more into emulation. It's going to have all the signposts, all the guidance, and hopefully some information that isn't available elsewhere on the internet. As always, the key to all this is to fuck around and find out, and how to do it all. As ever, there will be no provision of any links to any ROM sites at all whatsoever in this series. So today I'm going to show you how I built, or I'll talk about how I built this device you can see here, which is a Beelink King. And this thumbnail you can see is from the Retro Game Core website and his YouTube channel. And I basically follow this step by step. But I'm going to talk through kind of how it worked and some stuff that wasn't covered in this video. As a quick recap, in the last few videos I've talked about the Super Console X Pro that I bought from eBay. That was a dodgy knockoff console with 114,000 ROMs on it. As it turned out, once I dug into the Sam SD card, actually only had 48,000 ROMs on it and a load of rubbish on there as well. And I redacted that to about 4,000 games before I gave it to a friend of mine. I've since redacted it further, and it forms kind of the backbone of my own ROM collection. Having given that off to a friend of mine, I was like, well, what I want is something a bit more powerful that I can use for myself and I can actually make and curate myself. And the thing you can see here, the Beelink King, you can buy, I think, the Super King or the Super King X and so on. It costs about 60, £70 to buy the brand new from Amazon. And it is an Android top set box, so a little bit like a Fire Stick or an Apple TV plug-in, that sort of thing. The key thing about the Beelink that the Super Console X couldn't do is this will allow you to play Saturn games, whereas the technical architecture in the Super Console X and a lot of the cheaper plug and play devices won't allow Saturn games. And as you know, I'm very keen on emulating the game Guardian Heroes and have a bit of a play around with it. So I thought, hey, I'll build my own Beelink. What I'm going to talk through now is, in this relatively brief video, some of the problems that I had and some of the things that I learned. The first thing that I learned is that whilst I followed the guide that Retro Game Core has step by step, one of the key things I had to learn myself and understand was how to flash images. Now, I covered in the video a couple of days ago, I covered how to use Win32 Disk Imager, which is a way of flashing SD card images. Keep in mind, this isn't the same as copying them. To copy an SD card, you put it in your computer, you click it with the mouse, you drag it onto another SD card and it copies over. But flashing an SD card means copying everything on there, the partitions, the data that the computer can't read, everything else, and so on and so forth. But when you're flashing SD cards, unless you have an infinite number of SD cards and you're willing to throw them away every time you finish up with one, you need to learn how to reformat them. And reformatting them means learning how to remove the partitions. Now, partitions in an SD card are things that by deleting or reformatting, you can't normally remove them. Once you put them in there, they're basically there like set in stone. So what I had to do was learn how to recover and properly reformat my SD cards using a Windows PowerShell and command line prompts. And to do that, I'm now going to flip over to a bit of screen capture footage and show you exactly where I learned that because it wasn't included in any of the other video guides that I could find. Okay, so we are now on a website called LifeWire. I'll pop the link for the exact URL that I used into the description, or I'll put it on the screen or something like that. We're about halfway down the page, and what we're looking at very specifically is a very useful, very clear guide of how to remove partitions from an SD card in Windows. On the left, you can see that this article also covers how to format an SD card, how to format write protected cards, and how to tell if it's partitioned. It's all useful stuff. I'm not going to get into that. The key thing when you start messing around with your own SD cards, not just for these Android TV devices, but also for builds you might do in your Steam Deck with Batacera and all that sort of stuff. The key thing is to know how to remove partitions. So on that note, I am going to show you this page here. This how to remove partitions. It's got step one, which is right-clicking the start menu and going into Windows PowerShell. It explains what Windows PowerShell is. It tells you what you need to type in, disk part, and then list disk, press enter. Keep in mind, when you're doing this, if you're anything like me, you'll end up thinking that you're Neo from the Matrix because you're in this back end of the operating system for your computer that you never normally go into. So it is kind of cool. It is also kind of daunting. Here's where you find the details for the actual SD card. You press enter, then you type in list partition, and it will tell you how many partitions you have. It is cool to do this. Just do it very carefully. Make sure you type everything in very carefully. Messing around in PowerShell is no joke, but it does allow you to select the partitions and then one by one delete the partitions. And here are some nice screenshots. Here's some nice guidance. Once you've deleted the partitions, you have to then create a partition primary. Otherwise, your SD card is essentially utterly unusable. So please make sure you do that before you finish, and then you essentially close up the whole process. Um, Hopefully that's okay. I know this is a bit cheeky doing a screen capture from another website, but what I am going to do is put the link here on the screen so you can see it. And then also when we go back to the rest of the video, I'm going to pop up my own personal notes for my own personal kind of reference, just summarizing this on screen while I just talk over a little bit more. So as promised, here's just a quick text summary on the screen of how to do that, how to delete disk partitions and get your SD card back to completely normal. So you can then reflash it and do various bits and pieces with it or use it for whatever you want. Um, just while you've got this up on the screen, I'm just going to throw out a few other bits and pieces in there. Firstly, it was news to me that these partitions are static, not elastic. You can't be clever and just copy over all your emulation folders and just switch out one or two files. You need to do the Flash fully clean installs all the way. Never, ever, ever try to speed things up. The first Flash does not create several partitions. Do not create them manually. There's lots of misleading threads out there. The first boot up in your Android box will spend about 60 seconds doing everything for you. Don't get overconfident as I did and start thinking that you can like cut corners and shave bits off here and there. Don't. Every time you do something with an SD card, just strip it back all the way back so it's completely clean, completely fresh, completely reformatted, and then start again from scratch. Otherwise, you'll just be giving yourself a headache. Um, Other tips that I would like to point out is don't use a needle or a pin for using the physical reset button on one of these boxes. Use something non-conductive. So I use toothpicks or cocktail sticks. Um, What else to note? Oh, the Beelink had a ports folder where I threw in games like Streets of Rage Remake, and it actually worked, which was actually really surreal and strange. So I just unzipped the RAR file for the game, so not a pack file, and I just threw it into the ports folder on the Beelink, and it worked. I haven't been able to get any subsequent device, like not even something like Batacera on a laptop. I haven't been able to get that to run Streets of Rage Remake, so it's a bit weird that it worked in the B-Link, but it didn't work in anything else. But who knows? Um, okay, hopefully that's helpful. On another note, I just want to talk about Emulate for a second. So as we mentioned in the previous video, the 2017 Super Console X Pro image version used Emulate 3.9. When I did my B-Link, I actually upgraded to what was the current Emulate then, which was 4.6, and they're now on 4.7. What I noticed were quite a lot of substantial and slightly annoying differences. So, for example, with the new version, with Emulate 4.6 that I had in my B-Link, I could delete the empty folders for the consoles I removed, but they would then reintroduce themselves every time I switched the console on. So I couldn't just tidy it up permanently. So it felt a little bit messy and annoying. Also, the old Super Console X Pro allowed me to delete individual games via the user interface whilst the console was on. The new version for 4.6 didn't seem to allow me to do that. I had to essentially write down each ROM I wanted to delete and then later on connect the SD card into my computer and actually delete them manually, which is a bit fiddly. I think they've now fixed that on 4.7, but I guess ultimately all I want to talk about is the fact that the Emulate versions will vary from version to version, and if you move to the updated new ones, you'll find different and either more or less functionality than the janky, sketchy plug and play box that you might be familiar with. Speaking of which, I just want to show you something to do with Emulate in just a second. So what I'm showing you here is the GitHub page for Emulate. And again, I'll put a link in the description or in the video comments or anything like that. But long story short, This essentially is a really good resource for you to use, just to use Emulate if you're going to be building your own Android top set box. As you can see, it's got a list up to date as of the current release, which is 4.7. And what it does is it gives you really handy information of what the name of the folder is, what platform goes in it, what sort of core it uses to emulate, and keep in mind it is built on RetroArch, what the ROM path would be, and what sort of files you can put in. Is it 7-zip? Is it zip files? Is it bin files? All that sort of stuff. And it does this for every single console that you have. Obviously, keeping in mind, I've already discussed, I don't care about loads of these consoles. I mean, what is a Mega Duck, really? But for all these sorts of things, yeah, if you want to mess around with it, and as always, fuck around and find out, it will talk about all the different cores. So here we've got, Game Boy, we've got Gambati, Gear Boy, MGBA, Same Boy, all these various things. A lot of them I haven't even mentioned because the main one that people use is MGBA. And then it talks about the formats that you can have the Game Boy files in. So 7-zip, GB, or zip. And it does this for all the consoles that you'd be interested in. If you want to mess around and tweak and sort out like a custom Android box, either for yourself or as a gift for a friend, or just because you're deconstructing and rebuilding something you bought online, then this is a great page to use, and I'd strongly recommend bookmarking it. It's got some other stuff here about ports and various bits and pieces. Like I say, I mentioned I got Streets of Rage remake to work, which is amazing. I don't really know how I managed to get that to work, but there we are. And then it has other bits and pieces here. It's a really useful, really helpful web page. I will pop the link in the description, and you can just Google it anyway. GitHub Emulate, and definitely worth using as a resource. And there we have it. Those are all the tips I want to include in this little video. It was interesting making my own Android like top set box. It was cool getting the Super Console X Pro, and essentially it took me 3 or 4 months to really understand how to take it apart and rebuild it. But after I'd done that, it was fun using that knowledge to make myself like a really ramped up, hardcore, much more capable version that looked really slick. The Beelink is a really cool design. It looks really slick. It really impressed loads of my friends when they came over to see it. And yeah, it was a good, fun project. Also, again, as usual, helped me sort of understand and refine my ROMs. And yeah, I got Saturn games running on the B-Link as well, which is brilliant. So I was playing Guardian Heroes, and I was able to mess around, on the big screen, plug it all in. It was good fun. Yeah, so hopefully those tips are useful. Go on the GitHub, learn about MULEC, and learn how to configure various bits and pieces, and of course, disk partitioning on a SD card on a Windows computer, really important skill to have. Was it worth doing it? Yeah, it was worth doing it for fun. Do I still have the B-Link? No, because it died. The actual hardware just crapped out after about 6 months of use, give or take. I generally wouldn't really recommend these kind of boxes or use cases scenario because they're cheap and they feel flimsy and it's a lot of faffing around. I mean, it was good to do it to learn, and I would definitely recommend learning how to do it. So if you want to, you can make one for a friend of yours or your friend's kids or something like that, which is exactly what this sort of um, slightly bloated ROM set of like random whatever dated retro games. It's perfect for that sort of literal plug in and play, pick up and play. But for myself, having had it and having used it for the best part of a year or so on, I'm actually quite glad that I stopped doing it and that it fell apart. Obviously, it broke, and then eventually I moved on to using an old laptop that I had as my plug in and play emulation kit. We'll talk about that more in a much later video, but most people have got a spare laptop or something lying around, something that's so old it basically can't run Windows and can't work anymore. You can still use that for retro emulation, and we'll cover that in one of the much later videos, around about sort of like 14 or 15. But yeah, overall this was fun. Hopefully this video was of some use, slightly more technical than the previous videos, but like I say, I do want to cover the technical stuff that I learned that was useful. Um, Keep on letting me know your thoughts. Please comment down below, and thanks everyone. Until next time, stay classy.